The morning light crept softly through the window blinds as Margaret sat at the edge of her bed, clutching the worn-out photo frame of her late husband. The picture had faded with time, but his eyes still shone with warmth, the same eyes that once promised her a life filled with love and respect. Decades had passed since those early years, and life had taken a cruel turn. Her children, the ones she had raised through nights of hunger and storms of struggle, now saw her as nothing more than a burden. The old house she once filled with laughter now echoed only with the ticking of a clock and the whispers of dust gathering on forgotten shelves. Her son, Michael, and his wife had been hinting for months about how unsafe it was for her to live alone. They spoke of better care and comfort, but behind their soft words hid a hunger for ownership, the house, the land, the little savings she had left. When the decision was finally made, it wasn't out of love. It was convenience wrapped in guilt. They arrived one Sunday morning, carrying forced smiles and fake sympathy. Margaret didn't argue. Her hands trembled as she packed her belongings into a small suitcase, just the essentials: her husband's photo, a woolen shawl, a small box of letters, and the old rosary she never prayed without. The drive to the nursing home felt endless. Through the window, she watched her memories blur. The oak tree where her children once played, the grocery store that still sold her favorite tea, the church where she buried her husband, all slipping away like smoke. When they arrived, the building loomed tall and gray, its windows reflecting a lifeless kind of silence. Michael barely stayed 10 minutes. "You'll be taken care of here," he said, avoiding her eyes. His wife gave a quick hug that felt more like obligation than affection. And just like that, they were gone. Margaret sat quietly in her new room, small and plain, with just enough space for a bed and a chair. The nurse introduced herself kindly, but the kindness only deepened her loneliness. That night, as the moonlight spread across the cold tiles, she whispered to herself, "Maybe they've forgotten who I am." But deep inside her heart, beneath the ache of betrayal, something stirred. A calm, unspoken strength that only years of life and loss could create. She wasn't as helpless as they thought. The walls around her, the home they left her in, hid a truth no one in her family knew. And soon they would. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret settled into the rhythm of the nursing home. She observed quietly, the nurses rushing through corridors, the residents sitting by the window waiting for visitors who never came, and the manager, Mr. Collins, who walked with a stiff arrogance, treating the place more like a business than a home. Every evening, she sat by the large window in the common room, knitting softly, watching the golden sunset fade into gray. The other residents whispered stories of their own abandonment, of families that vanished after signatures and inheritance papers were sealed. Margaret listened, her heart heavy, but her eyes steady. One afternoon, she asked for the mailroom key. The young nurse hesitated but obliged, thinking the old lady only wanted to check her letters. But Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. Deep inside her handbag was a key, old and rusted, with the initials H&H carved into it. Henry and Hallow, the name of the law firm her husband had trusted for decades. She made her way to a quiet corner, opened the small locker that carried her name, and pulled out a thick envelope she had sent to herself years ago. Her trembling hands opened it slowly, revealing a set of yellowed legal documents: ownership deeds, tax receipts, and a single typed letter signed in blue ink. It was her husband's final act of love. Years ago, before his passing, he had purchased this very building, the nursing home, under Margaret's name. He had told her, "You'll never depend on anyone, not even family. You'll always have a roof of your own." She had kept it a secret all these years, never thinking she'd need to use it. But now, as fate twisted back upon itself, the irony was almost poetic. Her own family had placed her in a home she owned, the same walls they believed would hide her away forever. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. The clock ticked louder than usual. She thought about her son, the man who had once clung to her dress when frightened of thunder. How did he grow into someone who could abandon her without a backward glance? She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled softly, a a smile born from quiet realization. She had something they didn't: patience, time, and the truth. And she would use all three. As dawn approached, she placed the documents back into her drawer, locking them away carefully. Outside, the first rays of light broke through the clouds, painting her face with warmth. It was a new day, the beginning of a plan. Weeks later, the nursing home buzzed with nervous activity. Rumors spread that government officials were coming for an inspection, something about mismanagement, missing funds, and staff mistreatment. The manager barked orders, nurses cleaned in haste, and residents were told to stay quiet. Margaret, however, sat calmly in her chair, knitting as though she had been expecting this very moment. Her eyes followed the movements of the staff, every hurried step and whispered complaint. She had seen how poorly the home was run: expired medicines, neglected residents, and donations that vanished before reaching the needy. A few days earlier, she had sent an anonymous letter to the authorities, including copies of financial reports she found by accident in the manager's office. She knew corruption when she saw it, and she couldn't bear to watch others suffer. When the officials arrived, they questioned staff, checked records, and spoke to residents. Margaret gave her statement last, calm, factual, and with the dignity of someone who had nothing left to fear. Her testimony carried weight, not because of her words, but because of the quiet authority in her tone. Later that evening, the home was in chaos. The manager was escorted out by officers, staff were reassigned, and whispers of new ownership began to circulate. But Margaret stayed silent, her eyes glimmering with secrets yet to unfold. In her room, she unlocked her drawer once again and stared at the deed. Soon, she thought, it would be time to reveal the truth, not for revenge alone, but for justice and perhaps a little peace. As the night deepened, she sat by the window, the moonlight resting gently on her silver hair. The building was hers. The truth was hers. And the reckoning was coming. The next morning, a new administrator arrived, a polite woman named Mrs. Turner, who immediately began restoring order. She visited each resident, listening to their needs and promising change. When she reached Margaret's room, she stopped at the door, reading the old woman's name on the chart. Margaret invited her in and handed her the envelope, the one that held everything. Hours later, Mrs. Turner stood speechless in the office, staring at the ownership deed. The legal seals, the signatures, the transfer documents, all authentic. The home had indeed been purchased decades ago under Margaret's name. Somewhere along the years, as management changed hands, the truth had been buried. Word spread quickly. The staff whispered, the residents smiled, and the news reached even further, to the family who had left her there. When Michael received the call, his arrogance shattered. He rushed to the nursing home, shame and disbelief tangled in his expression. Margaret didn't scold him. She simply watched as realization dawned upon his face, that the woman he had abandoned was, and always had been, stronger than he could ever comprehend. She didn't throw them out or curse their greed. Instead, she donated part of the property's profits to create a foundation for elderly residents with no families. The rest she used to improve the home, her home, making it a place of dignity and warmth. As weeks passed, she found peace in the rhythm of small acts, planting flowers in the garden, sharing stories with the others, and watching the sunset without regret. She had been left behind once, but now she stood taller than ever, surrounded not by those who used her, but those who truly valued her. And though the world outside would never know the full story of the woman who owned the home she was left in, within those walls, she became a quiet legend, a grandmother forgotten by her family who rose to own her destiny.